to understand the sun in the 7th house, let's take a second to review and make sure that we understand what the sun symbolizes and what the 7th house symbolizes. So here's the 7th house. As you can see, it is physically or literally the area of sky around the western horizon. What happens in the western horizon? The sun sets, and that's the basis for everything that the 7th house represents. Sunset means things disappearing, and that's why the 7th house is the house of endings, or another way to put it is dispersion, or things going away, things leaving, things traveling. The sunset also signifies other people because the sun signifies the self. When the sun sets, then the self becomes less prominent and other people become more prominent. This is why the 7th house is the house of partnerships with other people, especially marriage. And that's why the 7th house has to do with the things we do in marriage. Intercourse, cooperation, and not just in marriage, but in any partnership, cooperation. And another ramification of intercourse or cooperation is exchange. And so the 7th house is all about how we exchange with people, and that has a commercial aspect to it as well. That's what we need to know about the 7th house. Let's take a look at the sun now really fast to make sure we understand it. The sun signifies the soul because it's a very bright planet. It's the brightest planet. And the soul is the source of awareness, and awareness is symbolized by light. Light facilitates awareness. So the sun represents vision, what light enables, vision and visibility. Because it signifies visibility, it signifies publicness, publicity, fame, extroversiveness, maleness, outwardness. Because it signifies vision, it therefore signifies command or authority or leadership, the person who has the vision and sets the direction. Because the soul is the locus of awareness, it is also the locus of identity. So identity is the result of awareness. So the sun signifies self, and it has to do with your ego, your self-esteem. The self is the core or the locus from which everything else happens, and thus the sun represents the core or the central point, the stabilizing point. One last thing about the soul is that it's the source of vitality, and the sun similarly signifies health and vitality. Now we can talk about how the sun interacts with the 7th house. And basically, they're pretty diametric. The sun has to do with visibility. Fundamentally, the sun is bright. It has to do with visibility. But the 7th house is where the sun sets. It has to do with disappearance. So this fundamental clash between the symbolism of visibility and disappearance indicates a problem with visibility. The person goes unnoticed. They get overlooked. They're not seen. Another big dichotomy between the sun and the 7th house is that the sun symbolizes the self, and the 7th house symbolizes other people. So this dichotomy gives rise to the interpretation that a person with the sun in the 7th house has relationship difficulties. They have difficulty achieving a symbiosis between self and others. In other words, they can't see the self as a part of a unit with others, and they can't see others as being valuable or important to the self. So some sort of relationship problem where the self is either sacrificing other people or being sacrificed for the sake of other people, not having a symbiotic, mutually beneficial concept of the relationship between self and others. Another dichotomy between the sun and the 7th house is that the sun is the big authority figure giving orders, but the 7th house is a place for cooperation and democracy. So the interpretation of the clash between these symbols is that this person has cooperation problems, especially in the sense of conflicting with the person who's giving the orders, conflicting with the decision makers, conflicting with the leaders. Finally, the sun is the life force, but the 7th house signifies death. And this indicates a person that doesn't have an abundance of vitality or has a problem with their life force, gets unhealthy. So this doesn't sound that great, does it? The sun in the 7th house is doomy and gloomy. So does that mean that if you have the sun in the 7th house, you are doomed and gloomed to be unnoticed, unhealthy, uncooperative, and self-destructive or destructive of others in bad relationships? Well, yes and no. The color black is the color black, but just about in every shade of pink or yellow or orange or any bright color, there's a little bit of black. So similarly, the sun in the 7th house is kind of black. Like literally, it's the sun setting. That is not the only color in your painting. So you have to see how it mixes with the other factors that affect the sun and with the other factors that are in the chart. So now let's turn our attention to some actual well-known people that have the sun in the 7th house. And obviously there wouldn't be any well-known people with the sun in the 7th house if the only thing that existed in their chart was the sun in the 7th house. So just the fact that we have known people, noticed people with the sun in the 7th house means that you have to blend this factor with all the rest of the factors. But don't shy away from keeping your black paint black. The black paint is black. Don't be afraid of it. Just realize that it's going to mix with other colors. So 3 people with reliable birth times who have the sun in the 7th house: Barack Obama, Steve Jobs, and Charles Manson. Let's first look at the quality that they should be unnoticed. Obviously, none of these people are unnoticed. They're all famous people. So why? Well, Barack Obama, the first thing that should come to your attention is, yeah, he has the sun in the 7th house, but it's the sun in Leo. So that means he has the 7th Lord in the 7th house. So the sun in Leo is hardly the same thing, symbolically speaking, as the sun in the 7th house, nor is the 7th Lord in the 7th house the same thing. So it's the indications of the sun in the 7th house are being mixed with colors which are very different from that. Furthermore, his sun in the 7th house is in Raja Yoga with the 5th Lord and is right very close to the cusp of the 7th house, which puts it very close to being exactly opposite to the ascendant, which means that the sun in Leo in a Raja Yoga, a King's Yoga, is directly affecting the 1st house, the most important point in the chart. So you would be kind of infantile to think that just because he has the sun in the 7th house, he must be an unnoticed person. Steve Jobs also really is not an unnoticed person. Everybody knows about Steve Jobs, but it's a little bit less so than Barack Obama. He was often overlooked, and he was often not the first choice for things that he really should have probably been the first choice for. So the really important thing in Steve Jobs' chart is the mutual aspect between Jupiter and Venus. You'll notice that it's extremely exact, and it's extremely exactly aligned with the ascendant degree. Jupiter and Venus are both at 21 degrees, and the ascendant degree is at 22. So this is a really powerful mutual aspect that is very influential in the 11th and 5th houses. Jupiter happens to be his 7th lord, Venus happens to be his 9th lord, so this mutual aspect between Jupiter and Venus is a Raja Yoga, which makes a person very prominent and successful, and it's in his 11th and 5th houses very strongly, so it affects his intellect and his fortune. There is a 75% aspect, or Tripadadrishti, from Venus to the ascendant, which does give him an ability to be successful, but it's a little bit of a step down from a Barack Obama. As for Charles Manson, is he unnoticed? Well, you could say definitely, because literally he's put in jail for his whole life. People can't see him. However, we all know about him, and he's very famous, and he's one of the biggest names in modern history. So why is that? Again, it's a case of things aspecting the 1st house. In his case, he has the 1st lord aspecting the 1st house. And then his 10th lord, which is very important for things like fame, is in the 10th house. And it's with Rahu, when it's the 10th lord and the 9th lord as a yoga karaka. So that means that it's forming a Raja Yoga by its union with Rahu in the 10th house. So he has the 10th lord in the 10th house in a Raja Yoga, and he has the 1st lord aspecting the 1st house. So again, you would be kind of silly to say that, well, he has the sun in the 7th house, so he must be unnoticed. Furthermore, he also has, like Obama, he also has a Raja Yoga of the 7th and 5th influencing his first house. So he has the 7th Lord Mars in the 5th house, while the 5th Lord Mercury is in the 7th house, making an exchange of 5 and 7, which is a Raja Yoga, exchanging a Kendra and a Kona, an angle and a trine. And his Mercury is at 3 degrees and his ascendant is at 5 degrees. So that Mercury is very, very strongly sending that Raja Yoga by aspect into the actual ascendant. So he becomes very famous. Now, let's consider the third factor, the third thing that we talked about with the sun in the 7th house, the fact that it should trouble the relationships. Does Barack Obama have this relationship difficulty? I would say yes, but no. Yes, in the sense that he's the president of the United States, so obviously he's not a submissive fellow. He wants to be the leader. He needs to be the king. And that's indicative of the sun in the 7th house, a real need to be the king. But no, in the sense that he's very successful at it, he's very good at it, and also has very excellent marriage. So there must be conditions in his chart where this relationship dynamic is just impelling him to be a leader, but not making him abusive to others or disliked by others. What is that in his chart? First of all, it's the same thing that we brought up already. The sun in the 7th house is the 7th Lord in the 7th house, and it's the sun in Leo, so it's very comfortable being in that 7th house. It's in a conjunction with the 5th Lord, forming a Raja Yoga, and then it's sending that Raja Yoga to the 1st house by its aspect on the ascendant. Besides this fact, the subsidiary 7th house is like the 7th house from Venus. Venus's 7th Lord is also in Venus's 7th house. And the moon's 7th Lord is in the moon's 9th house. So the 7th Lord is in the 7th house, Venus's 7th Lord is in the 7th house, the moon's 7th Lord is in the 9th house. His 7th house is actually doing really fine. The only thing that's weird about it is that the sun is in the 7th house. And so in that mixture of colors, you get a very bright color with a little bit of a shade of black in it, which is the need to be a king. How about Steve Jobs? Does he have weird relationships, difficulty relationships? I would definitely say this is a big yes for Steve Jobs. He has a very unusual family relationship, really unusual relationship with his wife in the early stages, with his child. With Jobs, the reason why it eventually turns out good is just because of that Raja Yoga between Jupiter and Venus being so dominant in the 5th and the 11th houses. The 5th will have an effect on marriage. Charles Manson, he's an even better match. I mean, he's like a super good descriptor of how bad the sun in the 7th house can be if you add more black to it from other things in the chart. So in his case, his sun in the 7th house is conjoined to his 1st Lord in the 7th house, which is the same interpretation as the sun in the 7th house. You see, the sun is like a natural ambassador of the 1st house. It's the Bhavakarka for the 1st house, because they symbolize basically the same thing. They both symbolize self. So he's got a double whammy. He has the sun in the 7th house and he has the 1st Lord in the 7th house. That's a double whammy on all of those things that we went over. But the real thing in Manson's chart is this very, very unstable moon by its conjunction with Rahu. Both of them at 4 degrees. Both of them right on the ascendant degree, more or less. The ascendant degree is 5. So very dominant in the 10th house. Very dominant, very, very dominant in the chart. This really unstable moon, which is not going... If you have a very, very unstable moon like this, in addition to the sun in the 7th house and the 1st Lord in the 7th house, you're not going to be a person that treats other people very well. The third thing that we talked about was cooperation problems, conflicting with leaders. Obama, not really. He is a leader. He is the authority, the decision maker. He's the president. Again, that just has to do with, well, his sun in the 7th house is in Leo. Steve Jobs, yes, he really does have this issue. Cooperation, conflict with leaders, being iconoclastic, going against authority, being the underdog, going against the mainstream. He is, however, able to be a leader himself on a smaller scale than Barack Obama, because his sun in this, one of the major reasons is his sun in the 7th house is the only planet that's anywhere in any of his 4 kendras. So that sun nature is dominant in him. Charles Manson, cooperation problems? I don't know. I don't think so. Duh, of course, Charles Manson's the worst. He's an outlaw. So look at his sun. It's in Scorpio, and then compare that to Barack Obama. And this is a good lesson. It can be this simple. Barack Obama, sun in the 7th house. Charles Manson, sun in the 7th house. But Charles Manson's 7th house is Scorpio. Barack Obama's 7th house is Leo. Sun in Leo is very good with authorities, and it's good at being an authority. Sun in Scorpio is a double whammy. Scorpio itself is iconoclastic and anti-authoritarian. Sun is the authority. So Manson's sun is all kinds of messed up. The sun is in the 7th house, that already clashes it with everything. The sun is in Scorpio, that already clashes it with everything. And then he's also got the first lord in the 7th house, which is exactly like the sun in the 7th house. So he's a triple whammy. 3 doses of black. Besides that, his moon is wacky by its destabilizing conjunction with Rahu right on the cusp. And besides that, even he has a chart where only 3 signs are occupied, which makes a person, or indicates an aggressive type of person. The final consideration for Sun in the 7th house is that it has an adverse effect on health. Barack Obama, he seems to be pretty healthy. And really, it's all the same reasons that we've been talking about. Sun in the 7th house in its own sign, that's fine. Sun in the 7th house in a Raja Yoga with the 5th Lord, that's great. Sun aspecting the 1st house, that's also very healthy. Besides this, some new information, he has the 2nd Lord in the 1st house, and he has the 1st Lord in his own sign. Steve Jobs, unhealthy? Yes. Died of cancer at a fairly young age. And so it's not only the sun in the 7th house that made Steve Jobs unhealthy, it's also really the fact that his 1st Lord is in the 6th, while his moon is in the 8th with the 8th Lord. And his 6th Lord, Saturn, is aspecting his 2nd Lord, Venus, perfectly, exactly. As I'm saying, think of it like colors. As far as the health thing goes, sun in 7th house is a black color. To have your 6th Lord aspect your 2nd Lord is also a black color. To have Saturn aspect your 2nd Lord is also a black color. To have the moon in the 8th house is also a black color. To have the moon with the 8th Lord is also a black color. To have the 1st Lord in the 6th house is also a black color. Steve Jobs had all of those. Charles Manson, his health kind of is fine. His real problem is his mental health. So his physical health is fine, which is obvious because his 1st Lord is aspecting his 1st house, and his 2nd Lord is also aspecting his 1st house. But the mental health is the real thing for him, and that's also obvious because his moon is exactly conjoined to Rahu in the company of Saturn in a chart with only 3 signs occupied right on the ascendant degree. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.